The service that I will now talk about in more detail that does the event processing includes things like a monitoring service that automatically restarts the service or the queries if something goes wrong. It includes a management interface so that I have a single system image, even though my event processing platform runs on multiple cores or even multiple VMs in the cloud. So having a service instead of an infrastructure is one of our design goals here. So I mentioned the name StreamInsight already, and again, I'm assuming that some of you at least know the product StreamInsight. The effort to provide StreamInsight in addition to the box product as a service in Azure currently runs under the name Windows Azure StreamInsight. It's not signed off with marketing yet, and I should also make clear this has not been released, right? So everything I'm going to talk about is a service that runs as a CTP. So it's out there in the form of a preview, but it hasn't been released and the name hasn't been finalized. The code name is Project Austin. You might have seen or heard about Project Austin. That's the code name for the Windows Azure StreamInsight service running in the Microsoft Cloud, right? So let's start with setting up that whole use case. What is the architecture? What's the basic interactions here? Well, we have the Azure Cloud. We have an IT pro, say, that realizes the need for event processing for a StreamInsight deployment with regards to the scenarios that I mentioned earlier. Eventually, what this person would do to get to a StreamInsight deployment is to go to the Windows Azure portal. Right now, this is not StreamInsight is not on the Azure portal yet. We run a private CTP that only has programmatic APIs. Eventually, this is a service that is supposed to be part of the ecosystem of Azure. Right? You go to the Azure portal, you can provision compute and websites and storage and SQL Azure and Service Bus, and eventually also StreamInsight. So that will be the model of the interaction. The Azure portal would then go against the APIs and create a StreamInsight instance in the cloud. The user could also go directly against the APIs, and this is what we are currently offering. Similar to other Azure services, there is always a UI aspect and there is an API aspect. So I can create a hosted service with the Azure portal through the user interface. I can also use the REST APIs for that. So we are following the same principle. We are making the management of StreamInsight in Azure available through the portal as well as through a REST API. And I will demonstrate the REST API in a second. As soon as I have this StreamInsight instance up and running, I can start flowing events. Right? I can develop my application against it, and I can define my data sources and my data sinks, corresponding to the examples, the scenario examples that I gave before. Those data sources could be phones, tablets, web browsers, cars, connected cars, machines, sensors, everything that produces machine-borne data. Configured in a way so that it is streaming into that cloud deployment of StreamInsight, and I will talk about the exact interfaces here for the streams. Then I have my own StreamInsight application running in that instance that does the event processing, that does correlation of events, aggregation over time windows, specified as declarative link queries. And from there, the results that are produced eventually go into the event consumers. That's again something that I, as a StreamInsight customer, can configure. Where do my results go? Where do my aggregations go? That could be a storage, for instance, SQL Azure, Azure Storage, Azure Blobs, persist that, and then have a dashboard pick it up from there, and that's going to be part of my demo. I could stream that into Service Bus and then use that interface to go over the networks to another consumer of these events. Or I can still define my custom event sync, just like I can for the on-premise StreamInsight products and platform, still write my own custom event sources and sinks. I can use that same interface, the same APIs, and the same way of development also with the cloud service. So that was kind of the big picture. I mentioned this, the APIs, the REST API a few times. So at this point, just so that there is no slide overload, I would like to go to, I will share that now, a sample solution, Visual Studio. I'm sharing my desktop. And what you see here is a Visual Studio solution that we provide with our CTP. So the CTP of Windows Azure StreamInsight, also known as Austin, comes with an SDK that you install on the client, just like you would install a Windows Azure SDK or Service Bus SDK. You also install a StreamInsight SDK that lets you develop StreamInsight applications on your client that eventually will run in the cloud. And the sample demonstrates these application development aspects as well as the bootstrapping to actually get the service up and running. Since we are not on the Azure portal just yet, this is how you would currently, I say currently, with the current CTP, get your StreamInsight Azure instance up and running. And this is the currently active project here, service provisioning. It is really, there's no StreamInsight relationship with the SDK here. So you see the references don't include anything specific because all this project is doing is using a REST API. So it's doing plain old HTTP requests to the specific URIs of the StreamInsight management service, requesting an instance of StreamInsight. Right? And the only thing a user here, a sample user like me now, would need to specify is in the app config a few parameters like how big is that instance supposed to be. StreamInsight in Azure scales out over multiple cores and VMs. And the current way of specifying the size of the deployment is kind of similar to how I would specify that for hosted services, where I have a way to define the size of the machines and then the number of the machines. And here I do something very similar. I can specify the size of the compute stage and then the size and the number of nodes for the ingress stage. And later I will talk more about what those two stages mean, but they all contribute to the compute power of StreamInsight. So I'm defining the size of my deployment. I'm defining a port for the data ingress, and that will be relevant for my data sources that stream their event data into that instance. They will need to address that port and the corresponding URI. And then I can also define, do I want to use HTTPS or just plain HTTP in case I need to encrypt and validate the service address and make the data ingress a little more secure. And again, this is the current status. We're going to have more security features as we go closer to our release, to our GA. So just to demonstrate that, I will run this project. This is what you would see if you sign up for our CTP and if you download the sample and run it the first time. First, you have to create a few things in Windows Azure. Since we are not directly integrated into the portal, you would have to create an empty hosted service that we then use to provision into. And this is basically the process. The provisioning project creates a few certificates that you will either use to connect to the service. And what happens right now is it goes through a Windows Azure deployment. And as you know, this takes 8 to 10 minutes, sometimes more. This is what we'd have to go through in order to bring up these roles that eventually represents the StreamInsight service. So I'm not going to wait for that. Just wanted to kick it off and show how that works. That would be how you would currently work with the sample and set up your instance. Going back to the presentation. So I mentioned StreamInsight and the concept of streaming data a few times. I don't know, this is not an audience where we can do a show of hands. I think we have enough time for me to quickly go through the high-level concepts of streaming data and StreamInsight that are kind of necessary to understand in order to, talk more about the cloud specifics of StreamInsight and of the service. So the usual example, the usual setup we use to explain streaming data as we understand it, as we in the StreamInsight team in SQL Server understand it, is this parking lot example. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen it. If you have seen any StreamInsight presentation, you have seen that example. So let's try to motivate the paradigm, the notion of streaming data with an analogy of a parking lot. Imagine the question, how many red cars are in a parking lot? Well, if we assume we are a relational database, the analogy here would be to walk out to the parking lot, walk through all the rows, and then count vehicles that are fulfilling that predicate, being red and being a car, right? So there's a very clear corresponding SQL theory, easy to understand, and that's how I would fulfill an ad hoc query against persistent data. Right?